back to another edition of the podcast, and tonight is our Game Week 28 National League preview and predictions. It's the first live show of 2026, and we haven't actually done a preview show in nearly a month, so yeah, it's not good, that, to be fair, but we're looking to try and be more consistent from now on until the end of the season. But as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Paul. Paul, firstly, how are you doing?
Yeah, good evening, Luke. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you very much, mate. It's back to a full league programme this weekend after FA Trophy and the mad sort of Christmas and New Year period. So yeah, looking forward to it and talking about some of the transfers and the movements teams have made to try and help themselves in the back end of this season.
Yes, there's certainly been a lot that's been going on within the National League in the last couple of weeks. Not just in terms of transfers, managerial departures and incomings in that department as well. Of course, we're going to speak more on that very shortly. But we will come to the live chat first and see who is in tonight already. Joining us early, we've got Lee with us. Welcome, Lee, to the stream. We've also got Jason, who's joined and said, "Evening all. Hope everyone is well." We're both doing fine. Thank you. Yeah, I think somewhere I'd like to start off tonight is actually Boston, because that were quite a shock to me. Of course, Graham Coughlin has departed the football club, and they've since actually brought in Paul Hurst, which I think is a brilliant replacement for Graham Coughlin. I know you'll probably be aware that whenever National League clubs looking for a manager, Paul Hurst is always one of the first managers that comes to my head as someone that everyone should be going for. And for Boston to be able to bring him in, I think that's a great appointment.
Yeah, it was a bit of a surprise with the fact that Graham Coughlin was maybe sort of sacked now, but when you think about it, Luke, this time last year they seemed like dead and buried, and he orchestrated the great escape for them. And I think come the summer they were kind of probably hoping that they weren't going to have a similar situation to that. And okay, they're not in such a desperate state as they were this time last year in terms of league positions, but I think they probably would have expected to be slightly more comfortable in the league. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute they'll be knocking on the door of playoffs, etc., because they're still finding their feet in the league and are probably one of the smaller teams in terms of maybe budgets and the ability to attract players, and it's just how they are. But it's that they clearly didn't want to keep slipping, which they felt they were doing, and sort of saw the change there. And it may well have been the fact that Paul Hurst was available. He's been at Boston previously. Yeah, he's got the pedigree within the league to keep teams in this league, get teams out of this league. And I suppose they probably looked and thought, well, this is the opportunity to employ him. He's one that they quite liked whilst he was available, because you never know when these managers are going to pick up jobs. And so, that stick or twist dilemma has been sort of put in place. They've twisted and gone with Paul Hurst. So we'll see how they get on. And, again, it's another team that are in and around that bottom half, the relegation battle, that are now looking to get themselves out of it, similar to with Gateshead when we spoke about them getting their new management team in as well, and teams down the bottom there are being as active in the transfer market as any team at the top end.
I've got confidence, to be fair, that I think they'll stay up quite comfortably now. Actually, we did our mid-season predictions a couple of weeks ago, and I said that I think that they're going to sleepwalk into relegation. They're winless in 5. Form overall, it hasn't been too good. I thought they'd really kick on from last year, and throughout the season they've been comfortable, I suppose. But I think in the last couple of months, they're getting closer and closer to that drop zone, and they're now involved in a relegation battle. And I think freshening it up with bringing in someone like Paul Hurst, for me, I can't see a Paul Hurst side going down from the National League. As for Graham Coughlin, he was very well liked by Boston fans. I think it was quite torn between the fan base to even let him go. And I think, to be honest, at times, I think sometimes, as for every manager, it always runs its course, and they probably did need to freshen it up. But I don't think for Graham Coughlin he'll have any issues with being able to get another job in the National League in the near future. I know Hartlepool in the summer actually wanting to bring him in, and he actually chose to stick at Boston. That could be interesting, of course, with new owners at Hartlepool, and that's another topic to come on to too. I suppose is Hartlepool United. Of course, the ownership's been announced now. I think for Hartlepool, we've spoke about them probably being the worst run club in the division, and for them to now have a change at the top, a positive future perhaps for the Pools.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably come a little bit too late for them to potentially push into the playoff places, but I think it's just, in terms of the fan base and the stability of the club, and it not being a bit of a circus, if you like, media circus around the ownership and the Jeff Stelling issue and everything else that they had on earlier on in the season, is, you can just concentrate now on the on-field matters of pushing on. They've settled the manager issue. They've now settled the ownership issue. They've signed a goalkeeper today from Southend. So, they're looking to improve the team on the pitch. And fair play to them, because they're still within a fighting chance of getting in them playoffs. I think they're that little bit too far behind with the amount of games they played and the amount of points they may have to catch up. But who knows, now that that is settled, and there's a sort of a renewed enthusiasm, I would imagine, from the fan base for Hartlepool to sort of kick on now in this back half of the season and try and knock on their playoff door.
Be interesting to see what happens with Nicky Featherstone. Of course, I believe he changed from the interim manager and actually been given the job until the end of the season now, and it'd be interesting to see if they change from that. I think if you look at his time so far overall at Hartlepool, particularly when you look at results recently, maybe they will be looking to make a change in that department, and bringing someone, as we've mentioned, like Graham Coughlin being available. It'd be interesting to know if they go down that route. That could be quite interesting, I suppose. And of course, there's a lot of good managers available. Derek Adams as well, the ex-Morecambe manager, he's available. And, speaking of Morecambe, of course, they're out of the FA Trophy now. Of course, it's not the National League, it's not a league fixture, but they lost by 6-2 against National League Northside, Kidderminster Harriers. That certainly is a circus, I suppose, at the moment there. And it's interesting because, when the manager for them, Ashford Johal, does a post-match interview, he's saying the same things every week. And, you're getting people who don't even watch the National League, and it's coming on the feed because it's so repetitive at the moment, with what he's saying, and just saying, will he just change up what he's saying? What's your thoughts on the whole situation there?
It's a really strange one, Lee. I'm just trying to find my predictions from whether I said,
you had them to go down, yeah.
I've had them to go down, and I don't think I couldn't remember just off the top of my head there. I don't think for 1 minute that if you put in a performance in the trophy, and yes, it's the trophy. Yes, he probably changed his team up a little bit. I have no idea. I didn't check, but. They shouldn't be going into a game and losing 6-2 at home to a team below. No disgrace in losing to a team below them, but to be 5-0 down, 5-1 down, 6-1 down. It's unacceptable off the back of all the other things that the results they've had, and like you said, the repetitive nature of his retort to the media. I understand there was a fans forum last night with the owners, the Punjab Warriors, and reading threads on Twitter, it didn't really feel that the Morecambe fans were filled with any sort of confidence behind them in terms of money they might be putting in, how they run a football club, have they got the knowledge of running a football club? Is there a suggestion that this manager's only in place because of the community they're from? And would he get a job elsewhere? And then, fans were being called racist because they weren't backing the ownership. It just seems like it's just going to end in tears, Luke. But it appears that it's not going to end anytime soon with the management team they've got in place. It looks like they're going to be sticky, because I think one of the comments was, well, things can quickly change in football. And the only thing we know with Morecambe is that things aren't changing with him. I think he said he said not so many months ago, in 4 months, we could be one of the best teams in the world or one of the best teams in England or Europe. They've just been drubbed 6-2 at home by a team in the league below them. I'm not sure that sort of comment has aged particularly well. So, listen, they keep flipping a coin on players. We've said it often. He doesn't know whether he's got the best formula in terms of his combination of players, his possibly his formation. Defensively, they've not been brilliant. So, yeah, I can't see them escaping the drop at this stage.
I think what he's recently said, and I've heard this a number of times, I'm disappointed with our mentality and approach. Well, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot because as a manager, you should be changing the mentality, if that makes sense. And there's no excuses with Morecambe, I don't think, because on paper, they have a squad that should be more than capable to be able to compete at the right end of the table in this league. I think it's purely down to him. Everyone let him off, for the first couple of months because of, the shift of ownership and, what the previous owner had put the club under. But we're at a stage now where something's got to change, I feel, for me, when I look at it at the moment. And, I didn't watch the whole fans forum. It was nearly 2 hours long, but I watched bits of it. I skipped to certain parts and I saw the comments as well. And, what I gathered was that the ownership the owners were actually trying to avoid questions on it. And getting really frustrated when fans, ask these potentially awkward questions for him. But, as a fan base, Morecambe at the moment, it's not acceptable and it doesn't feel like anyone's taking accountability. I don't particularly blame the manager for not leaving because I think if you're in his position, I don't think he's not going to leave. He's getting paid at the moment. He's not going to want to leave because his reputation for getting a job in the future. He's not going to get a job in the future in probably management based off what he's doing at Morecambe at the moment. So he's going to want to stay to try, turn it round, even if he probably believes that in his head that maybe, he is a little bit out of his depth. And, owners. Go on. Sorry, Paul.
No, you're right. I think you've hit the nail on the head. It feels like he's out of his depth. He's come from academy football. This is mortgage football. This is 3 points every week required, and you can't experiment and you can't say we're improving and mentality's improving and we're going to be the best team in 4 months. You need to be the best team you can be now. And to be fair to him, he's got them into a position where they're in with a fighting chance of getting out of it. It's just how they go from here. But it's really odd because you watch how he sort of carries himself in these post-match interviews, and and excuse me, it looks like he just doesn't give a shit, Luke. He just kind of he sticks to the point of what he's trying to say. He's very structured in that, which is fair enough, but it almost feels it's a little bit manufactured and a little bit out of all the textbooks and everything else. There's nothing natural about him. There's nothing
like you're talking to AI, to be honest.
There's nothing inspiring about him. In terms of what you feel he could get out of the team. And you're right, on paper, yes, they were sort of loanees, free agents, teams, lads probably surface requirements in squads they were in. But he has gathered together a squad that I believe, and you believe, and we all think is capable of competing in the National League. I'm not suggesting they'll be playoff contenders or go for the title, but you shouldn't be shipping the goals they've shipped in. And I'll go back to, one of the only teams they've beaten is Wealdstone, and they were sort of 3-0 up and almost threw it away, and you can't be doing those things when you're trying to survive in the National League. And the problem you've got is Boston have changed their manager, Sutton are improving, Truro feel like they're improving, Braintree have stuck in there, Gateshead have thrown a load of money at it, by it feels like, or at least a load of opportunity with the new manager. So it also feels really positive down there for certain teams, even if they're in a little bit of a predicament. It doesn't feel positive for Morecambe. For them it just feels like they're only going one way.
I am a little bit concerned for Morecambe at the moment. I genuinely feel if all they need to do is just change the manager and bring in someone like Derek Adams, or even, to be honest, someone like Graham Coughlin now. I think if he had that squad, he would definitely keep them up. I think most managers would. I just think, I feel sorry for him, but then I don't. I just feel that Ashford Joe Harley's just a little bit out of his depth, to be honest. I think it's proven for everyone to see. it's not a nice situation, particularly for a Morecambe fan. And I wasn't particularly impressed with Morecambe's owner either, based on the fans forum that I saw. He were very similar to Ashford Johal, very textbook answers. Got very frustrated when anyone asked a difficult question, which I think a fans forum is for you to basically communicate and put fans at rest for all these issues at the moment, because on the field, it's not looking good. Off the field, we saw the thing with, someone on the board being part of a terrorist organisation, and he brushed that under the carpet as well. He came out and actually mentioned that, it's just the football regulators. They're always looking for stuff. It's like, no, you've got someone on your board who's in a terrorist organisation. There's nothing you can really make up about it, is there? To be honest, it's not right. And for me, overall, there's just something about it, just with things like that coming out, and I'm just not too certain that these owners are going to be able to fully turn it around for Morecambe and be long term, in my opinion.
No, you're right, and I think to wrap it up with Morecambe is they've got to be given a chance, and I think you're right. The only way they're going to be given a chance is a new manager comes in. New manager comes in now, he might change some of that squad because they're not performing, or there's a feeling they're not performing. He might get a tune out of what they've got. He might see something that Joel doesn't. I don't know, but I think you're right. In this case, sometimes it's better the devil you know. I think in this case it's run its course. A bit like Boston. Boston have looked at it and gone, it's run its course. We need to do something now before it's too late. I think the fear for Morecambe fans is that this ownership group aren't going to do that with their manager, and they are going to stick to their guns, and it could be detrimental to their league status in the National League come the end of the season.
Certainly could be. Anyway, we'll come on to talking a bit on the transfer side of things in the National League. Of course, in the last couple of weeks, there's been some big transfers that have actually happened. What was interesting, though, was, of course, Carlisle United's manager, Mark Hughes, actually came out to speak to their local BBC, and he actually came out and stated that, he's quite frustrated because some of the targets that the players that Carlisle were trying to target, they haven't been able to get them over the line. They've gone elsewhere, or they've not been able to bring them in. And he's actually come out and said, because of that, we're probably not going to be making any more additions. Now, at the moment, if you look at Carlisle, they are in the title race. They're second in the league table. Do you still feel that potentially these room where they've missed out on these targets? They should be looking to bring in other players. Of course, in the window, I believe they brought in Ryan Galvin, full-back, which was certainly an area I felt they needed to look at. And of course, Chris Clark's now there until the end of the season. Do you think there's still areas potentially that Carlisle should be looking at to bring in players, even if they haven't got the first choice targets?
I think you're right. I think possibly a criticism of them is defensively, in terms of when you look at the other teams around them. But to bring someone like Ryan Galvin, who's got huge National League experience, has got a little bit of EFL experience now with Barnet, and to be able to get Chris Clark till the end of the season, they're two not bad signings, Luke, considering you can't get your top targets, aren't they? I know Carlisle are now looking at, Carlisle's, the Yorks, the Rochdales, even the Boreham Woods now are looking above them and looking to see whether they can get players out of those the EFL, etc. But I think Carlisle are still well placed. They've got a good manager. They've got a great fan base. It's not like they're struggling to get into the playoffs and scrambling around for players. The thing is, and I've said it before, whilst you're on top or relatively on top, you do need to strengthen. It's a good time to do that. But so is everybody else. And there's only so many players really available. And they're all, all this. You would imagine that the majority of those quality players are all being looked at by all these teams. Like Reagan Booty has signed permanently for Boreham Wood, Luke. And then I think we spoke off there. Was he one of those targets?
Well, I definitely think he was. Yeah.
Carlisle are going for the title alongside Boreham Wood. So Boreham Wood are in a position to be able to give Reagan Booty, notwithstanding his personal terms, but the ability to play at the top end of the National League, where he's already been with them this season. So, Jeff King, has come back to York from Boreham Wood. I know he's only a loan deal, but at the same time, he's now strengthening York. York aren't going to sell him. Boreham would have to replace him. So, these teams do need strengthening, because every team needs strengthening. There's very, very few teams. Pep Guardiola, Manchester City, spent 65 million quid on another winger. All teams need strengthening at all times. It's and you'd be daft not to look at the opportunities to sign some quality players if they become available. But it's a hard market, because there's a lot of teams up there in the National League willing to give these players a chance.
I think Carlisle fans are quite frustrated with the comments, because I think which they are. They're meant to be, with the new owners, they're meant to be quite a big dog, aren't they? Which of course, as I've mentioned, they are. But that means that they feel that they should be able to bring in the best. No one else in the league should be able to compete financially, and they should be always getting their targets. And based off what Mark Hughes said, it was always as if like, oh no, we're losing out because they're choosing other clubs. Which for Carlisle is frustrating, particularly when you look at the title race at the moment. Like, I've never backed Carlisle to win the league, and I still don't. I still think there's probably 2 or 3 teams better than them. And I said that, I think I had them in the top 3 in my mid-season predictions. I think I had them 3rd. But I felt that was because I thought they'd strengthen even more. And that hasn't really been the case. Ryan Galvin, yeah, he's a good signing for them in the fullback position. And Chris Clark is, it needed to happen, to be honest, for them to have any hope of potentially getting promoted this season, was for him to come in. But, I still look in that midfield position. Do they need to strengthen? I know Alex Gillies extended his stay until the end of the season, but defensively as well, they rely very heavily on Morgan Feeney, and if he gets injured again, will they start leaking loads more goals? For me, I just look at Carlisle, and I do think that they're not consistent enough. There's always a bad performance there every so often, in them. And that's why I think if they were to go up, they'd have to win the league. I wouldn't fancy them in the playoffs. And I just think at the moment, I look at the strength of York, and I just think York are a lot probably stronger than them. And to be honest, even Forest Green, you're looking at the players they're bringing in, Boreham Wood, all of a sudden they're able to attract these quality players. For me, I just think there's a few sides ahead of them at the moment, and I can't see Carlisle going on to win the league. Anyway, any other signings in the National League for yourself that stood out?
No, I mean, I think Reagan Booty to Boreham Wood was definitely a one. I saw him play recently, and I thought he was very, very good for Boreham Wood. And that's having lost Jeff King, who was very influential in that team, back to York. Getting someone like Booty permanently, it is a massive fillip for them. I know they've gone and signed, I think a lad from Queen's Park Rangers, I believe, I can't remember his name, in terms of trying to replace Jeff King. But I like that signing. Luke Garrard has clearly been able to convince him to stay here rather than relocate back to the north where he's played previously. I do like that signing. But Scunthorpe brought someone in from the Scottish Premier League today that they have had on loan. Forest Green brought a couple of young lads in from other sort of EFL teams and the lower leagues. It's York have not signed anyone, but they strengthened their squads by bringing some of their loan players back. Southend have got rid of a couple today, with probably potentially some others coming in. Even the likes of Wildstone, Gateshead, True, everyone's signing. And to be honest with you, it's really hard to keep on top of, Luke, because it's interesting to see what the movement of the players are, and it certainly sort of helps to freshen up that back end of this season and see how teams might do.
I think the one that stood out to me was probably Connor Smith of who Scunthorpe have obviously signed.
That's right. Yeah. So that's who I meant. Yeah.
He was a star man for them, very liked, a fan favourite, and for them to be able to sign him on a permanent basis, for me, that's a great signing. Just adds to an already strong squad. And I've always mentioned that I feel that they've probably got about 11 to 15 players that are really good, but then behind that, they're players that probably are up to the level to be able to keep them in the same position. Well, they're going out and adding to the squad, adding good players, and they're certainly on for being able to finish in these playoffs now quite comfortably. Anyway, we're probably at a point where we will get on to the National League predictions. Of course, we haven't done one of these in a while, and I haven't actually calculated the scores from the previous one that we've done, so I'm going to have to go and rewatch the podcast next week to be able to find out the scores. We'll get on to the predictions then, if I can get it up here. Before we do that, though, please remember to like and subscribe. It genuinely does go a long way. Of course, if you've not subscribed to the channel, this is the home for National League content. We bring you interviews, weekly live shows, and we do the odd couple of vlogs with football clubs as well. So please do like and subscribe too. And if you want to play along with the Prediction League, this is how you do that.
We'll show you how to get 51% off the RRP of the Sum Up Air. With no contracts or monthly fees and a low 1.69% per transaction, this handy device makes it easy to accept all card payments. Simply visit www.sumup.co.uk.
Right, round 28, I think we're on. Are we on 27 now? There we go. Right, round 27 we're actually on at the moment. And it is the first game that we're going to look at is going to be Hartlepool United versus Altrincham. Of course, we've already spoke about Hartlepool and the news there of their takeover. They're coming up against an Altrincham side that certainly could be seen as a side that could be sleepwalking into relegation and be dragged into this battle towards the bottom at the moment. Of course, they're not on the best of form themselves. And I just think for me, when I look at Hartlepool coming into this game with the change of ownership now, there's going to be a big crowd there. I'm pretty confident that Hartlepool may be able to get the win. And I'm going to go for a 2-1 Hartlepool win. How do you see this one going? You're on mute.
Sorry, mate. Altrincham was a difficult one to judge, really, because when you look at their recent results, they've lost 4 and 1-1, but they've had to play in that. They've played York, Halifax, Rochdale, Aldershot, and they actually did beat Scunthorpe. So you look at the 5 teams they played, that's a really tough schedule over the last sort of month and a bit. Obviously, they changed the manager recently, and they brought in 4 players over the last couple of weeks. That's going to really help their squad. I think you're right, though. Hartlepool at home are going to be strong. It boils down to the goals that Hartlepool can score. I think Hartlepool win, but I've gone with 3-1.
3-1 to Hartlepool, yeah. For me, I can't see Hartlepool losing this game. I know they have just been tonked away from home to Woking, but with the change of ownership, there'll be such a positive feel surrounding the club. And their home form this season has not been too bad. Probably don't win enough games, but they don't lose many at home at all. And yeah, I'm going to back Hartlepool to win this game 2-1. We'll get on to the next game now, which is, of course, Brackley versus Yeovil. I think Brackley are the lowest goal scorers in the National League, and Yeovil are the 4th lowest. I think that's all we need to say. And it's going to be a low-scoring game. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw for this one. How do you see it?
Yeah, snap. I mean, listen, Brackley I had them to be the team that will sort of drop down, and they've got games in hand, but they've got to get those points on the board with those games in hand. And if they beat Yeovil at the weekend, they're only then 2 points behind Yeovil, still with 2 games in hand. So that pulls Yeovil in. I think both teams will be desperately not want to lose this for obvious reasons, but like you said, I can't see this being a high-scoring game. So I'm with you, Luke. I've gone with 1-1. So knowing our luck, it'll probably be 4-3 or something like that. So
yeah, we'll have to move on to the next game. The next game is Braintree versus Boreham Wood. Now, this could be a bit of a potential banana skin for Boreham Wood. Of course, Braintree have only conceded 9 goals at home all season. I am going to back Boreham Wood, though, to win this game. I'm going to go for a 1-0 Boreham Wood win. They're flying at the moment, and I think they'll be able to break down Braintree and take away all 3 points. So 1-0 to Boreham Wood. How do you see it going?
No, I think you're right. It's Boreham Wood are a strong team in a hugely good run of form. I can't imagine this is one that Braintree will be looking at and marking down as potential points. But it'd be a bonus if they can get something out of it. But I think Boreham will be too strong and they'll win 3-0.
Next game that we're going to look at then is going to be Eastleigh versus Aldershot. Eastleigh have a great record against Aldershot. There's often a lot of goals in this fixture as well. If we look at Aldershot at the moment, just been battered by Solihull Moors on home soil. They're a side that, currently occupying in the bottom 4. I have got faith in them to be able to get out of it, but they need to start picking up results. And for me, Eastleigh away from home, I look at Eastleigh and, knocked out of the FA Trophy. I still think Eastleigh win this one. I'm going to go for a 3-1 Eastleigh win. How do you see it going?
It's a really difficult one for Eastleigh. I know when we did our mid-season predictions, Luke, it was a case of, they're not going to go up, they're not going to go down. They're not out of the FA Trophy, so they haven't got that sort of carrot to dangle in front of players. It could be a bit like treading water with them, really. And they can go one or two ways. They could sort of kick on and hope they will sort of push on towards those playoff places, which I think is too far for them. But they've got to be careful they don't just drop slowly. Aldershot are a difficult team to predict. With John Coleman in, they had a good run of form. They then get battered, like you said, they get absolutely battered at the weekend. Who knows? I'm going to go for a 2-2 draw.
2-2 draw for this one then. Moving on to the next fixture, Halifax Town versus Boston. This is a must-win game for Halifax if they want to have any chance of being able to break into the playoffs. Of course, Southend have got a tough fixture at York, so it could be an opportunity to potentially break the gap or close the gap between 7th and 8th in Halifax at the moment. Boston have had just 1 win in 11, but it's probably the worst time to be playing them when a new manager comes in. We speak about new manager bounce, and bringing in someone like Paul Hurst does, for me, make this a bit of a banana skin, but I still think Halifax at the moment, scoring a lot of goals, got a full squad, not many injuries. I think Halifax win this one 2-1. How do you see it going?
It's massive for Halifax as well because Solihull are playing Carlisle, so there's potential for them to sort of drop points there. Like I said, Hartlepool potentially tricky one at home to Altrincham. So Halifax really could solidify their place around sort of 7th or 8th. You're right. I mean, it's a tricky one for them because they need to be pushing on and take advantage of teams playing each other at the top end, because I think we said the top 7 is going to be determined by when they play each other and the way they're all sort of picking up points at the moment. So I'm going to go with Halifax will comfortably win this 3-1.
3-1 to Halifax then. The next fixture is, of course, Gateshead versus Rochdale. Gateshead new manager in Rob Elliott, of course. didn't start well away at Tamworth, but he has had time to be able to recruit. Of course, they have lost Kian Adom, who's moved to Burton. I think that was expected. But they've looked to strengthen. And, when you're in Gateshead's position, it's always difficult to bring in players, I find. But I think they've done a pretty good job in the players that they've brought in. Sam Bowen's come in from Solihull Moors. The lad from Altrincham, the name's gone out of my head, the ex-Boston player, he's been brought in there too. But they're coming up against a Rochdale side who will be looking to get back to winning ways in the league after being defeated to Hartlepool. Of course, it's still in Rochdale's hands to win the league. And if you look at Gateshead's home form this season, just one win at home all season, I don't fancy their chances in this one. And I'm going to go for a 3-0 Rochdale win. How do you see it going?
Yeah, I mean, it appears that I upset some Rochdale fans, Luke, in my prediction.
I knew it was going to be honest.
By putting it forward, there was no intention to upset any of them. My understanding was that they were going to be away from home longer than they actually are. So I apologise that I wasn't aware of that. They're obviously away. They are away from home. I think, the benefit to Rochdale, they lost in the trophy at the weekend, so they haven't got that to worry about. And I wouldn't expect them to have that as sort of the top of their agenda. They can now concentrate on the league. The belief with the Rochdale fans, as they quite sort of rightly pointed out to me, I suppose from their point of view, is that they feel their squad strength is better than it was last year. Last year they did drop away in the FA Trophy in the league, and it was detrimental to them in terms of the Tuesday, Saturday periods. They will have an element of that. I think the challenge also with Rochdale is some of their games in hand are in amongst those teams that have got to play at the top end. So really, they've got to take advantage of winning there. But you're right.
Sam Beckwith as well, of course, the star centre-back. He's out for the season now. And we've mentioned him probably being one of the best centre-backs in the division. For them to be without him as well, it's bad news for them. And I think they need to find a replacement.
You're right. And I think Gateshead won't want to be playing Rochdale on Saturday, even though they've signed 7 players in the last 2 weeks. They've got a new manager, new assistant manager, Louis Story as well. The feel good factor is back at Gateshead now. But I think it'll be an entertaining game because Rob Elliott plays entertaining football and he's signed some good players. So I'm going to go with Rochdale 3, Gateshead 2.
Oh, quite an interesting one, that, to be fair. Interesting prediction. Moving on to the next fixture, it's, of course, the mighty Morecambe coming up against Scunthorpe. Can we finally see Ashford Johal get Morecambe back on track and defeat Scunthorpe? For me, no. I think it's going to be another disappointing day at the office, and I think Scunthorpe could potentially batter Morecambe in this match. I've gone for a 4-1 Scunthorpe United win. Them bringing in Connor Smith today on really good form. Only 3 defeats all season still. And Morecambe at the moment, they're just a complete mess. As we've mentioned, they're getting thumped. You can always count on them to score goals, but defensively they're very poor. And I think when you look at some of the players Scunthorpe have going forward, they could tear apart Morecambe in this match. And I'm going to go for a 4-1 Scunthorpe United win. How do you see it going?
I've gone with, I've gone with 4-2 to Scunthorpe. One thing Morecambe seem to give is value for money in terms of goals scored and goals that they concede. And we spoke at length about Morecambe. I don't think we need to speak anything more about them in relation to this. But, from Scunthorpe's perspective, this is certainly one they're going to look at and say, look, we've got to get 3 points out of this. With Southend playing York, with, Halifax having a potentially tricky tie against a Boston who's got a new manager, Scunthorpe will look at this and say, can we push on and make that gap bigger? So, they're going to be the team full of confidence. Morecambe certainly aren't. And Scunthorpe will win this game, I believe, and it could be as much as 4-2 as I've predicted.
Next fixture is Solihull Moors versus Carlisle United. Solihull Moors have scored 17 goals in the previous 4 games. Carlisle themselves are known to score a lot of goals, have just been knocked out of the trophy by, I believe, seventh tier opposition, I think it is. Who they lost to. I could see a lot of goals in this one. We know Carlisle like to score goals. We know Solihull will do too. But both sides, defensively at times this season, have been a little bit vulnerable. Yeah, I think it'll be a cracker, this one. I could see this being the game of the game week for entertainment. I'm going for a 2-2 draw. How do you see it going?
I've gone with a 3-3 draw. Exactly the same reason as you. You look at Solihull, they're absolutely on fire, aren't they, in terms of scoring goals? Carlisle, we know the threat with them going forward. They're unbelievably good. We've talked about the frailties Carlisle show relatively in terms of their squad defensively. And I think you're right. This could be a really, really good, similar to the Morecambe Scunthorpe goals. So I've gone with 3-3.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, in the way the game's going to go for this one, of course, big news for Solihull as well. Joe Sabara, forgot to mention, he's extended his stay until the end of the season. And, we know how good of a player he is from his previous time in the National League. And, they're aside for me, with the squad they've got, they could potentially cause a top 7 a few issues. But the thing is, of course, there's a lot of points to make up. And, consistency's always been an issue for Solihull Moors. I look at those sides on the fringes of the playoffs at the moment, Solihull, Halifax. I look at those two and probably consistency just seems to be a bit of an issue for them. And then you've got Hartlepool who probably don't win enough games. They draw too many. And that's why I can't really see anyone breaking into the top 7. But I think if the season was to start now with Solihull's squad, I think they could easily break into the top 7 this season. But moving on to the next game, Sutton versus Forest Green Rovers. Sutton are on poor form at the moment. And of course, they're coming up against the Forest Green side. Who left it late against Halifax, but came from 1-0 down to win. And that's a huge win for Forest Green Rovers to keep them in the title race. I think they're going to win another game here. I'm going to go for a 2-1 Forest Green Rovers win. Sutton, as we've mentioned, not on the best of form at the moment. Been a little bit unlucky if you actually look at some of the fixtures. But no, I think Forest Green will win this one 2-1.
I've gone for exactly the same, Luke. It probably will sort of run in a similar vein to the York Sutton game last week, where Sutton will hang in the game, make it difficult for Forest Green because they have to, because they're near the bottom, and they have improved. They are improving, but they've had a bit of a tough run, a bit like Altrincham over the Christmas period. But with the new management team they've brought in now, and sort of they're embedded a little bit, and they've improved. They'll be okay, but that's a tough game because what you got to think about is this top 7 are relentless and they just all keep picking points up. So, Robbie Savage will be going there saying, we've got to win this game. York have got a tough game. Scunthorpe, we think, will win quite comfortably at Morecambe. Rochdale probably could comfortably win at Gateshead, and all of a sudden, they're not careful. They're the ones that drop points to a tricky Sutton team. They're going to be sort of just dropping off that pace potentially. So, yeah, a must win for both teams. But I think Forest Green will gain more by the win than if Sutton did, if that makes sense. So, yeah, Forest Green 2, Sutton 1.
Wealdstone versus Woking then. Wealdstone, I think, have just got 1 win in 8. Or it might actually be that they're winless in 8.
They are. Yeah, 2 wins in 10, but that was game 1 and 2. The next 8 they lost. So it depends how you look at stats, Luke. But they've won in the cups against lower division. But the Stones, there's no two ways about it. Picked a few draws up, but haven't won since the middle of November. So for nearly for 2 months now. So Wealdstone need to pick up a win. They are at home, which is always an advantage to them. It'll be a slick, quick surface. There's been lots of rain everywhere. But Woking are a team that are one of those that are pushing on. And I know they've had a bit of an indifferent Christmas period, but from where they were to where they are now, they're doing amazingly well. And I think this will be a really tricky one for the Stones to navigate. I think that it will be 2-2.
I've gone for a Woking win. They're just a very odd side, so inconsistent because, they put Hartlepool to the sword, which is a difficult thing to do by 4-0. Hartlepool defensively are pretty strong to not only beat Hartlepool, but to also beat them in the way they did. You also look at them, they've gone away to Carlisle and put 3 past them and won there. They've held Rochdale and Southend to draws. But yet you look at some of the defeats that they've had. They've lost to Braintree this season. They've lost to Brackley this season. They've lost to Yeovil this season. Wealdstone in the reverse fixture as well. They're just so inconsistent if you actually look at their results. But I do fancy them for this one. They need to get a bit of a run going if they want any chance of being involved in this charge for the playoffs. And I think they'll win this one 2-0 after that win at Hartlepool. Next fixture is Truro versus Tamworth. Tamworth, if you look at the form, it's not been awful, but you look at some of the results, quite concerning for me. They're a side a bit like Wealdstone. I could see being sucked into a bit of a relegation battle potentially as the season goes on. And Truro at the moment are probably in the best position that they've been in all season. They held Forest Green Rovers to a point. The previous week, they won their fixture. Tamworth themselves, despite that Gateshead win, you look at some of the results, quite disappointing. And I think Truro could win this game. I'm going to go for a 1-0 Truro win. How do you see it going?
I've gone with Truro win. I think they'll win 2-1. I think you're right. They're now going to really try their best to push out of that to bottom 4, Truro. And yeah, Tamworth are sitting really nicely in mid-table. And, they're not far off being dragged in, a bit like Wealdstone, maybe Eastleigh, but they're still sitting comfortably at this present time. And they're picking up wins, losing a couple, picking up a win, losing a couple, picking up a win. That's not going to do them that massive amount of harm. It's whether they go on a run where they lose 4 or 5 on the bounce. So tricky one for them. Truro have picked up. They've improved. They're using their home form really well. And I think you're right. Truro will come out of this in a really tight game and will win 2-1.
Next fixture that we're going to look to preview, I think we are maybe on the final.
We are, yeah.
One now, which is, of course, the featured game of the game week. It is on DAZN, and it is between two of the sides in the top 7 at the moment. Top of the league, York City, coming up against 7th place Southend United. If we look at the reverse fixture, it was one of the first big fixtures at the start of the season was this between some of the big hitters, you could say. And of course, Southend held York to a 0-0 draw at Roots Hall. For me, in this one, York being at home, looking at York's form, they haven't lost since the 1st of October, which is just ridiculous. I think York will win this one. I think as well, if you look at Southend too on the other side, the actual record against sides in the top 7 has been very, very underwhelming. They're yet to beat anyone in the top 7 this season so far. So I'm going to back York to win this one 2-0. How do you see it going?
Yeah, I've gone for York to back to win this one, similarly to you, Luke. But I've gone with 3-1. They're just brilliant going forward at the moment. York full of confidence. They've signed more. I apologise. I said earlier that York hadn't made it. They've signed Morgan Williams from Yeovil, so they strengthened their squad in terms of defensively. They brought Jeff King back. They've got the lad from Sunderland. Is it Johnson? I can't remember. They've extended his loan. Defensively. So where Stuart Maynard may have felt that they needed a couple of bodies or sort of a bit of consistency, he's addressed that. And so they're in a really good position, York, aren't they? And yes, they've got the likes of Rochdale and Scunthorpe and Southend and Forest Green, Carlisle chasing them down. But when you're sitting at the top, you got to stay there. And I think this will be a good game for them to sort of prove their worth against a tough Southend side who will be looking to stay in those playoff places. But York being at home as well, that's always helps. There'll be a massive crowd there, no doubt, and I think they will prevail 3-1.
I find this game quite interesting because for Southend at the moment, they're very comfortable within the top 7. And, we've mentioned them. And sections of the fan base been a little bit underwhelmed, with them reaching the playoff final last year. I think they felt that they were going to kick on this season, and I actually think they have in terms of the actual ability within the squad. I think they're scoring more goals than what they were doing, remaining quite strong defensively, and they're doing a lot better against the weaker teams in the division. They're putting sides who sit back against them to the sword a lot more often than what they were doing last season. But what kind of has declined is them not doing as well against, the sides that, will actually come and attack them this season, like we've seen with York and all the other sides in the top 7. Their record's been really underwhelming. And for me, if Southend, which they're likely to do, finish in the playoffs this season, they could be over very quickly if you look at the record against sides around them. And, we speak about the playoffs, and I still back them to finish in them. This could be quite a big week and open a bit of a door because, if Southend lose this match and Halifax win, yes, it's in Southend's hands to climb back into the playoffs, but Halifax will actually climb into the playoffs and be 7th, which, makes it quite interesting. And I think the gap would only be about, I think they'd have 2 games in hand. They'd have 2 games in hand, and Halifax will be a point ahead, I believe, or 2 points ahead, which could make it quite interesting because we've still got, for Southend's case, a full set of fixtures to go until the end of the season. So it could be quite a big week for Southend and a big week for York as well to stay at the top of the league. If we look at the moment, York, I think only Rochdale are the side that could overtake them with games in hand. But if they keep winning, Rochdale having to catch up, potentially, York could break away.
Yeah, you're right. It's a really interesting top 7. I think if Halifax wins, Southend lose, Halifax will be on the same amount of points with Southend having a couple of games. But it's that old adage that we talk about, points on the board against games in hand, and those games in hand generally are midweek. When are they going to be played? It's a test of squad depth and quality when you've got a Saturday, Tuesday scenario. I think most of the top 7 are out of the FA Trophy. I know Wealdstone have got to play Forest Green in the next round as an example. So, it's going to be an interesting first month of the new year to see where this settles down. It's kind of difficult to predict at the moment, Luke. And I know we tried to do that a couple of weeks ago, but it's going to be difficult to pick whilst there are teams that have got so many other games in hand against others. Once it evens out a little bit, then we'll have a true reflection where we're at. But it does make it interesting. And all of those top 7, 8, 9 teams, all they're going to be looking at is we need to concentrate on ourselves, not worry about other teams. If we pick up points, we can't do anything about the other results, but we can make sure that we get the best of the results we can and see how it goes from there.
I think that more or less wraps up the podcast for this week. Please remember to like and subscribe, everyone. It genuinely does go a long way. If you've just come across this tonight, we do this every week. We preview all the fixtures. We've also got a number of interviews coming up in the future and some other exciting video ideas as well too. So please remember to like and subscribe. Also, check out our sponsors, Cards Accepted. There's a link in the description that will give you 50% off your card machine. No contracts or monthly fees. Paul, as always, it's been a pleasure for you to join me. And thanks for coming on.
No problem. Hope you shift that cold. You going to watch Halifax at the weekend?
Yeah, I should be going home from university to see Halifax. It's bad timing getting a cold at the moment. I think everything happens for a reason. We had Bongo's Bingo set up for next week, a student one. And I was like, the other night, I was like, oh no, I'm getting a cold. So it won't be gone by Wednesday. Yet that's now been postponed until February. So, everything seems to happen for a reason. But no, thanks to everyone that's tuned in tonight. Once again, thanks for joining me, Paul. And we will see you next time. Bye for now.